Hercule Poirot and the Tragedy of the Last Sonata. Chapter 1. The Last Fugue. A damp mist clung to the gas lamps of Regent Street as Hercule Poirot stepped from his hansom onto the wet pavement, his velvet-lined overcoat drawn close against the chill. The autumn evening breathed of decay and promise alike, for in its damp shadows lay the dying notes of a brilliant composer's final masterpiece, and a secret that threatened to end in tragedy. The summons had arrived at 3:30 that afternoon. An elegant card of cream silk, inscribed with delicate copperplate. Monsieur Poirot, your presence is requested at the residence of Monsieur Alphonse Moreau, 18 Cavendish Square, forthwith. A matter of life, death, and music. At once Poirot sensed the weight of that last phrase. He had prepared his little grey cells for a riddle less ordinary than the theft of jewels or the disappearance of heirs. This would be a case where beauty itself had become the instrument of murder. He cast a glance along the thoroughfare, noting shopkeepers drawing blinds and hansom drivers closing hoods, then crossed to Cavendish Square, a tidy enclave of Georgian terraces whose ornamental railings glowed dully in the lamplight. At number 18, the door lay propped ajar, its mahogany surface splintered, as though in haste or violence. Poirot's heart contracted at the discord. He raised his cane and tapped twice, the echo muted by the thick carpet of ivy on the facade. No answer came, only the hushed expanse of dim-lit windows. He tried the bell, but found the latch already loose, as if the occupants expected him, or feared him. Inside, the vestibule stretched into shadow. A single light burned in the library beyond, where the great upright piano stood open, its ebony lid raised like a blade. Poirot's eyes, sharp as ever, noted the sheet music strewn across its fullboard, the final sonata in B minor, its pages scored with furious arabesques and haunting requiems. The composer's thumbprint in ink marred the margin of the last movement, an ominous flourish of a man who had laboured at the keys until his strength failed him. "Captain Hastings," Poirot called into the gloom. His friend emerged from the anteroom, damp hat in hand, spectacles fogged with the city's sorrow. "Ah, mon ami," Poirot murmured. "It appears our host anticipated our arrival, yet his manners forbid him greeting us in person." Hastings frowned, surveying the room. The door was open, but no one seems about. "Should we call the housekeeper?" Poirot shook his head. "Not yet. Let us first ascertain whether Monsieur Moreau remains within. Please, Hastings, cast your gaze about for any sign of disturbance." Hastings swept his lantern across leather-bound volumes, ornate candelabra, and marble busts of Mozart and Beethoven. At the far end, a set of double doors stood slightly ajar. He pushed them open. The drawing-room was empty, its window curtains drawn. Upon the carpet lay footprints in chalky dust, footprints shaped like spats, size 10, leading from the hearth to the grand piano. Poirot knelt, inspecting one print. "The dust is fresh. Our composer fled or was forced this way after performing his last sonata." He rose, crossing to the roaring hearth, where a silver tray held 2 glasses of brandy, one half emptied. He sniffed the air. "Brandy, mon ami, Mr. Moreau's favourite." He turned to find Hastings examining the doorway behind the piano. "What is it?" Hastings whispered, pointing to the hallway beyond. A stain darkened the oriental runner, a smear of deep crimson. The journalist's breath caught. "Blood!" Poirot approached, cane tapping on the polished floor. A small cut, perhaps, or more telling, a struggle. He pressed his gloved finger to the stain. "Yes, Hastings. Animal heat yet lingers. Someone wounded here, He lifted a crushed handkerchief from beneath the piano's leg. It bore a monogram AM in curling gold letters. Monsieur Moreau's own cloth. He pocketed it. He has bled upon his own creation. Hastings's hand trembled as he held his lantern nearer. We must call the police, Poirot. This is worse than we thought. Patience, mon ami, Poirot warned, voice low. Let us find the composer first. He strode to the corridor and followed the dusty footprints toward a pair of French doors leading to the conservatory. Glass panes blurred by condensation revealed masses of ferns and palms, dew beading on rubber plant leaves like scattered pearls. Beyond them lay the small fountain, whose gentle burble soothed the senses on brighter days. Now, the water's silver chords seemed mournful in the sparse lamplight. Hastings stepped forward and pushed aside a potted palm. There, slumped on a bench of wrought iron, sat a figure in black evening coat, pallid, eyes closed, head lolling to one side. Poirot knelt, placing a hand on the composer's wrist. He still breathes, Hastings, he said quietly. A shallow pulse, but life remains. We must act swiftly. He opened the man's coat and examined a ragged tear at the shoulder, its edges crusted with dark red. A knife, likely, or perhaps a fine-tipped instrument, a composer's chord, but one that silences its creator. He gently dug his fingernail beneath the wound's edge, extracting a sliver of metal. A slender silver pin, as ornate as a stiletto disguised in filigree. Poirot's moustaches twitched. This was no ordinary blade. Hastings bent to lift the composer's head. He's conscious, Monsieur Moreau. Monsieur Moreau. He shook the man's shoulder. The composer's eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes glazed yet lucid with pain. Poirot, my last sonata. Destroyed me, he rasped. His breath rattled. It cannot be heard, nor completed. He clutched at his chest, groaning. Poirot supported him. Hastings, find hot towels and a flask of brandy. Apply gentle pressure to the wound. I shall speak with Monsieur Moreau. Hastings dashed toward the glass doors. Poirot crouched beside the composer, placing the silver pin upon his palm. Monsieur Moreau, you have gifted the world one final sonata, but paid a dear price. Who attacked you in your own music room? The composer's gaze, though dimmed, sharpened as he recognized his interrogator. Poirot, my friend. His voice trailed to a whisper. Beware. The last note hides the truth. Poirot's eyes glimmered. The truth, monsieur. Pray tell me at once. Which movement contained your secret? The composer's lips quivered. Third. Movement. Cadenza. Look. He attempted to raise a trembling hand toward the piano score, but collapsed, his head dropping against Poirot's shoulder. Moments later, Hastings returned with hot towels and a hip flask. The housekeeper, summoned by his urgent knock, arrived with a surgeon's case. Together they bound the wound and administered brandy. Poirot watched them work, brows knitted in concentration. Once the composer's breathing steadied, he whispered, Keep him warm. Send for Dr. Dalrymple at once. Hastings and I must search the study. They retraced their steps to the library, where the piano's music lay scattered upon the floor and benches. Poirot's lantern illuminated a single page missing from the sonata, its last variation gone. Hastings shook his head. Somebody stole the final bars. He pointed to the mantel, where a silver pocket watch lay unopened, its face scratched. Perhaps Monsieur Moreau dropped it in his struggle. Poirot pocketed the watch, timepiece, and finale, both stolen by an unknown hand. Hastings bent to retrieve the missing page's stub, a torn ledger marking. The binding here is fresh, Poirot. We must examine his study. Perhaps he keeps the score's original manuscript. He led the way to a heavy oak door connected to the library by a panelled corridor. The study lay cold, its desk in disarray, inkpots overturned, quills snapped. Books lay open on the floor, as if rifled in desperation. A candle burned low on the desk, its wick blackened. Poirot crossed to the desk and lifted the inkpot, noting its pristine ink, untouched by the struggle. He found a blotter upon which someone had written a single line in quick, jagged script. "Find me where the music dies." Poirot traced the letters with his finger. The music dies. Where? At the final sonata's last note, or at the composer's own threshold? Hastings, consider the clue. Someone wants us to search in darkness, where the music is silenced. Hastings frowned. The catacombs beneath the city, the cellar, or the grand organ loft where the echoes fade. He pointed upward. A narrow trapdoor stood ajar above the doorframe. Perhaps the organ loft, Poirot? Poirot's eyes lit. Yes, an echoing chamber where the notes die into the rafters and where only the initiated may trespass. He crossed to the trapdoor, pulled it open fully, and peered upward. A ladder led into the darkness. "Let us ascend, mon ami." Hastings fetched 2 lanterns, and they climbed into the loft, a cavernous space where dusty pipes soared overhead, and the organ's mechanisms lay exposed like the skeleton of a giant bird. Dust motes shimmered in their beams. Poirot searched each wooden chest and music case until he found one marked with Moreau's initials in gilded letters. He opened it to reveal the missing page of the sonata, the last cadenza, its notes scrawled in the composer's own hand. But beneath it lay a second sheet, a letter in spidery handwriting. He unfolded it. The letter read, "Alphonse, your genius outshines mine. To preserve your glory, I remove the final theme, leaving only your mortality." The signature, Etienne Duval. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The ducal name of our prima donna's mentor, her brother. Hastings exhaled. He envied Moreau's talent. He stole the finale to claim the sonata as ruin, not as immortality. Poirot nodded gravely, and he attacked the composer when confronted, nearly silencing him forever. But his ambition overlooked one truth. Life is the greatest sonata of all. They descended swiftly, notebook and manuscript in hand. Dr. Dalrymple arrived at that moment, peering anxiously at Monsieur Moreau's prostrate form. Poirot laid the letter before him. "Doctor, this reveals the assailant, Monsieur Duval. May I request you send for the constables without delay, and guard the composer jealously. He must not be disturbed until he recovers fully." Dalrymple bowed. "Your intervention has saved his life, Monsieur Poirot. I shall see to it at once." He bustled from the room. Hastings followed him to the door, then turned to Poirot. "Once more, you have unearthed ambition's deadly note and transformed it into a melody of justice." Poirot smiled, his moustaches quivering. "Indeed, Hastings, the last sonata nearly became a requiem, but here, at the loft's apex, we reclaimed its final theme and the composer's future." He tapped the manuscript folder. "Now, let us deliver this evidence to Inspector Japp and restore the harmony that ambition sought to destroy." And so, beneath the ancient pipes of the organ loft, Poirot concluded the first movement of this tragedy and prepared to herald its final resolution. Chapter 2. The Echoes of the Composer's Study. Captain Hastings and I returned promptly to Monsieur Moreau's Cavendish Square residence, our minds abuzz with the single damning revelation delivered in the organ loft. Etienne Duval, brother and mentor to the celebrated soprano Héloise Duval, had bidden his own kin silence Alphonse Moreau's final sonata forever. As the housekeeper ushered us through the drawing-room, I took in the wounded composer's fragile form, propped upon a chaise longue in the library's corner, bandages gleaming against pale, sweat-damp silk. Raymond, the housekeeper, hovered anxiously. "He stirs, Monsieur Poirot, but his strength wanes. He implored me to speak with you directly." Her clipped English carried an undercurrent of French cadence, proof that she had served this family long enough to learn both tongues. I nodded, offering her a reassuring glance. "Madame, we shall protect him. But first, we must sift through the remnants of Etienne Duval's treachery." She led us to the threshold of Alphonse's study, where overturned inkpots still bore flecks of vermilion, and the rugs, once plush, lay threadbare from recent upheaval. The open piano's keys were ashen under dust, yet upon its stand lay the completed movements of the sonata, each bar etched by Moreau's precise hand. Hastings bent to retrieve the scattered pages, gingerly placing them in order upon the cluttered desk. "I counted 8 leaves missing, Poirot," he remarked. "One we found above. Are there yet more concealed?" I closed my eyes, inhaling the declining perfume of lavender from a half-emptied sachet. The excerpt we recovered was from page 9 of the cadenza. If Moreau's manuscript comprises 20 pages, we must presume others were taken, or hidden elsewhere. I pressed a finger to the blotter, noting deep impressions where quills had been pressed. He wrote this in haste under duress. The final movements, especially the dénouement, were the prize. Hastings replaced the final page atop the desk. If Duval sought to claim the sonata's coda as his own, he might have destroyed the remainder, leaving no trace of Alphonse's concluding chords. He pointed to a smudge of black ink on the leg of the desk, a fingerprint, partial but telling. We should compare this to Etienne's prints. I strode to the tall window, pulling aside the heavy drape. The mist-laden square lay empty, lamplights a soft glow. "We will," I said softly. "But first, Hastings, interview Madame Duval. She resides at number 22, 2 blocks north. It is time we learned her account, and whether she suspects her brother." Eloise Duval's townhouse stood just off the square, its facade pale stone, wreathed in ivy that brushed the second-floor windows. A footman guided us through a tapestry-adorned hall to a sunlit salon, where the prima donna perched upon a chaise longue, a cup of chamomile tea warming her slender hands. Her violet eyes, so often alight with stage fervour, now brimmed with apprehension. "Madame Duval," began Hastings, "we beg your understanding. We come to ask what you know of your brother's visit to Monsieur Moreau last evening." She set her cup down with a clink. "You imply Etienne played a part in this horror?" Her voice trembled only slightly. "He called me earlier, 4 o'clock. He wished to discuss the finale of the sonata, for he yearned to conduct it himself. He entered Alphonse's study at precisely 4:15, and I saw them speak in the hall. I heard Alphonse object when I slipped away to change for rehearsal." She paused, glancing at Hastings. "I never saw him leave." Hastings leaned forward. "Did you hear raised voices?" Eloise closed her eyes. "A crescendo. Yes. Your detective Poirot would call it a quarrel. My mother overheard Etienne exclaim, 'I will not be overshadowed,' before the door slammed. I tapped my chin. Your brother's passion ran deep. Yet would he strike his fellow musician, or merely threaten? Did you see the silver pin?" She shook her head. "No, but that pin, Etienne's gift to me, years ago, bearing a fleur-de-lis motif, was identical except for its absence of a hidden shaft. My brother might have substituted it with one barbed for blood. Her voice cracked. He denied my plea to relent. He said only a composer's grandeur mattered. Hastings rose. You summoned us because you suspect him. Eloise sank back. I trusted him. I thought his ambition was only for my success. But now, he may have silenced not only Alphonse's music, but his life. I inclined my head gravely. We shall confirm his guilt. Meanwhile, madame, you must keep Etienne's pin, evidence of his intent, until the constables arrive. Eloise rose and retrieved from her jewel box a slender pin of silver filigree, set with a tiny amethyst. I shall place it here, she said, pressing the pin between her cupped hands. And pray Alphonse recovers to finish his sonata. We departed Eloise's home under a sky thick with mist, retracing our steps to Cavendish Square. On the way, Hastings murmured, "Her testimony rings true, but her affection for Etienne may cloud her judgment." I tapped my nose. Indeed, yet love often blinds. We must also speak with the gardener, Louis Boucher, who claimed to witness a cloaked figure exit the back door at dusk. Boucher's lodgings lay in a mews behind the square, a simple brick cottage whose small garden boasted glistening chrysanthemums. He met us with dirt-stained gloves and hat in hand, his features mournful. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain, please." I saw Monsieur Duval slip from the back porch just as the lamps were lit. He carried a bundle wrapped in sheet music. Hastings frowned. What became of this bundle? Boucher pointed to a hedge. He dropped it here, in foolish haste. I approached at dawn to find nothing but torn leaves. He shivered. I fear the rain washed the paper away. I directed Hastings to examine the soil, while I questioned Boucher further. Did you note the figure's gait? Anything of his footsteps? The gardener studied the mud. Large, size 10, I'd say. And he moved swiftly, without pause. Poised fingers tapped the air. Precisely the same prints we found within the study. These confirm his flight path and suggest he dropped the sonata's missing pages in that bundle. Hastings furrowed his brow. But if the papers vanished, Duval may retrieve them later, unless they lodged deeper in the foliage. We searched among the hydrangeas until Hastings uncovered a soggy scrap, a fragment of manuscript, the composer's handwriting still legible. Andante doloroso. He placed it in an envelope. This belongs to page 7. I smiled. Our puzzle reassembles itself. Once we retrieve the remaining fragments from Duval's estate, we shall restore the sonata and prove Etienne's guilt. With the gardener's thanks, we made for Scotland Yard, envelope in hand. Hastings turned to me as we walked. So we have his motive, his weapon, and his prints. Only time remains to unmask him. I nodded, moustaches bristling with satisfaction. And in the concluding movement, mon ami, justice shall be served in perfect harmony. Thus ended our second day in the shadow of the last sonata, the notes of intrigue still murmuring beneath London's fog, and the promise that by dawn's first light, this tragedy would find its final, irrevocable chord. Chapter 3. The fugue of fragments. The gas lamps of Cavendish Square cast trembling halos upon the autumn mist as Captain Hastings and I stepped from the hansom at number 18, hearts steeled for the next movement in the symphony of treachery. The sprawling Georgian townhouse loomed in the fog, its windows dark save for a single flicker of candlelight betraying the studies within. Inside, the wounded composer, Monsieur Alphonse Moreau, lay pale upon his chaise longue, tended by Dr. Dalrymple, who nodded gravely as we crossed the threshold. Hastings carried the single manuscript fragment we had recovered in the Duval Gardens, a sodden scrap bearing Moreau's own precise notation. while I cradled Etienne Duval's bloodied silver pin, the murder weapon made grotesque by ambition. Madame Raymond, the housekeeper, greeted us with trembling courtesy. Monsieur Moreau's condition is stable, thanks to Dr. Dalrymple, but he remains unconscious of the details. He murmurs of missing themes, haunted by his fugue's disappearance. Her eyes filled with tears as she ushered us to the study, where overturned inkpots stained the Persian rug, and the desk drawers lay flung open, their contents scattered like shards of a broken melody. I bent to retrieve what pages Moreau had left behind. 5 sheets of manuscript containing the first movements of the sonata, minutes of a fugue etched in perfect B minor. Hastings, triumph and concern mingling on his countenance, placed the garden fragment alongside the torn pages, noting how the ink's shade matched the composer's sanguine handwriting. Our task was clear: to reconstruct the missing measures, discover who stole them and why. My little grey cells, warmed by precision and logic, began their work. Etienne Duval's motives were no mystery. Envy of his protégé's genius, but the details of his crime required careful proof. We needed the remainder of the manuscript and any record of Duval's access to Moreau's study at the critical hour. Hastings suggested we question the servants and neighbours. I concurred and dispatched him to interview the porter and the night watchman, while I examined Moreau's personal ledger for clues as to the manuscript's whereabouts. As Hastings departed, I opened the ledger, a leather-bound volume of fine calfskin, its pages ruled in delicate red lines. Here Moreau recorded every séance of composition, noting dates, times, and inspirations. My eyes fell upon the entry for the day before the attack. 3, Cri, 6, Giusi PM. Final cadenza, Allegro con brio. Supplementary notation under lock and key afterward. Beneath this, in Duval's own handwriting, a marginal note read, "Requested to review page 18. I will collect additional leaves." The damning confession was clear. Etienne had been granted privileged access under the pretext of master-apprentice collaboration, yet he used that trust to purloin Moreau's most precious work. I tucked the ledger under my arm and moved to the door as Hastings re-entered, his expression resolved. He delivered his findings swiftly. The porter had witnessed Etienne leaving the house that evening, carrying a portfolio wrapped in Moreau's distinctive maroon cloth. The night watchman recalled Duval's faint footsteps in the corridor at dusk, followed by a soft metallic click that he mistook for furniture shifting. Together, these testimonies formed the spine of our case. "We must locate that portfolio," I declared, "before Duval can abscond with the finale." Our search took us next to Héloïse Duval's residence, a townhouse 2 streets north, where her frantic protests greeted our arrival. My brother's ambitions were large, but I never imagined he would stoop so low as to silence Alphonse's final fugue, she wailed. Yet within her drawing room, profile busts of Mozart and Chopin bore silent witness to her own musical pedigree, and her trembling hand produced a spare portfolio of identical maroon cloth from a locked armoire. Etienne prided himself on organization, she confessed. He insisted on multiple copies of every manuscript, though I never touched them. Her eyes glistened with uncertainty as she handed over the cloth, unfastening its leather straps to reveal empty music sheets, pages 6 through 20, now vanished without trace. Only the portfolio's lining bore a fragment of torn manuscript, which Hastings pocketed with care. We deduced that Duval's portfolio once held the missing pages before he transferred them to another hiding place, perhaps where he could work upon them at leisure. Héloïse suggested her brother's study, hidden behind a panel in his own attic, a sanctum she had never entered. She led us up a narrow stairwell lined with portraits of Duval family ancestors, all bearing musical instruments, until we reached the top floor and a plain oak door. Her key trembled in the lock as she confessed a mix of dread and loyalty. "Perhaps it is best he be confronted here," I suggested, "for to search publicly would tip him off. Bring our evidence and let him find himself surrounded by the proof." Inside the study was dim, the air thick with the scent of tobacco and ink. A grand desk dominated the room, its surface rangy with music stands and half-finished sketches of sonorous score. Hastings illuminated a corner, revealing a locked chest whose iron hasp lay broken. "He emptied his portfolio here," Hastings observed, "then torched the maroon cloth to destroy colour evidence. Indeed, a small brazier in the hearth held charred fragments, still warm to the touch. Among the ashes lay blackened ink labels stamped with Duval's cipher, along with curled fragments of manuscript. Poised before the brazier, we discerned portions of the missing pages, out-of-order phrases of the cadenza, as if Etienne had rehearsed them before discarding them to reduce bulk for his escape. I rummaged the wreckage until my fingers closed upon a folded vellum parchment, a letter addressed to the Lyceum's patron, Major Sinclair, offering a premiere performance of Moreau's final fugue at an exclusive private soirée. Duval's signature scrawled at the bottom. He planned to debut the stolen finale under his own name, I murmured. No wonder he sought to eliminate Moreau's manuscript. He craved the acclaim without the rivalry. Hastings slumped against the desk in frustration, and Moreau's life nearly paid the price. At that moment, footsteps pounded the stairwell. Eloise's gasp preceded her brother's enraged cry as Etienne Duval burst into the room, pale, wild-eyed, and brandishing a newly sharpened pencil like a dagger. His coat flapped behind him as he lunged for the brazier. "No one shall steal my triumph," he snarled, ripping the brazier from its stand to hurl embers at his sister. Hastings seized an inkwell and flung its contents in his brother's path, while Eloise shielded her face from ash. I advanced with calm purpose, cane tapping the hearth's edge. "Monsieur Duval," I said, voice firm yet gentle, "you have confessed in both ledger and letter, and your own fury betrays your guilt. I implore you to surrender, so that your abstraction of talent may not become the instrument of regret." Confronted by reason and his own disgrace, Duval faltered. The brazier fell from his grasp, and Hastings disarmed him of the pencil knife. Eloise rushed forward to save her brother from further destruction, tears mingling with the soot upon his cheeks. Duval's shoulders sagged, and he collapsed into Eloise's arms, his ambition finally undone by its own weight. We escorted him downstairs to await the constables, while Eloise comforted her brother with trembling kisses upon his brow. The autumn mist seemed less chilling now, as if, touched by the glow of hope, revived. Hastings and I gathered the recovered manuscripts, scorched but salvageable, and Moreau's ledger, each a testament to truth's persistence. Before we departed, Moreau, finally roused from sedation, appeared at the study door, supported by Dr. Dalrymple. Though weakened, his eyes shone with gratitude as he touched our hands in silent thanks. In that moment, the fugue of fragments became whole again, justice secured, artistry restored, and the composer's final sonata spared its ultimate tragedy. As we stepped back into Regent Street's mist, I turned to Hastings with renewed conviction. "Mon ami, though ambition may seek to silence beauty, it cannot withstand the harmony of conscience. The last sonata shall play on." Hastings nodded, offering his arm, and together we walked toward Baker Street, leaving the echoes of Duval's downfall behind us, and carrying within our minds the triumphant refrain of truth restored. Chapter 4. The Harmonies of Betrayal. The first tendrils of dawn crept across London's rooftops as I awoke to the faint echo of pianissimo notes drifting from number 18 Cavendish Square, where, late the previous evening, we had exposed Etienne Duval's treachery and rescued Alphonse Moreau's final sonata from certain perdition. Breakfast awaited in the library. Dr. Dalrymple's restorative broth, steaming tea, and the compositional fragments Hastings and I had gathered scattered neatly across the desk. Though fatigue tugged at my limbs, my little grey cells leapt at the promise of untangling the more subtle strands of Duval's betrayal. Those hidden motivations and the shadowy roles of any accomplices still lurking behind the music. Hastings arrived first, hats askew and spectacles glinting. He laid out the recovered leaves of manuscript, 15 pages now complete, though some bore singed edges where Duval's brazier had licked at the vellum. "We have enough to reconstruct the sonata in its entirety," he said, pride and relief mingling in his voice. But I suspect Duval's resentment was nurtured over many years. We must chart his path from admiration to envy, and question all who stood between him and Moreau's acclaim. I nodded, reaching for the ledger in which Moreau recorded every performance. Let us begin by examining the sonata's scansion, its themes of triumph and requiem, the very contrast that threatened Duval's fragile ego. Yet before we could proceed, a soft knock heralded Madame Raymond, the housekeeper, whose own hands still bore the smudge of ink from cleaning Moreau's fallen notebooks. She entered, carrying a sealed envelope addressed in Etienne Duval's spidery hand, to be opened only in the composer's presence. Hastings sliced the wax seal. Within lay a single sheet of paper, a confession penned in Duval's trembling script, admitting not only the theft of the final coda, but also a darker design. He had intended to steal Moreau's entire oeuvre and publish it under his own name as a rediscovered work of genius. But more damning was the line that followed. I could not abide that he, my pupil, should surpass me even in death. I handed the note to Moreau, who sat propped in his chaise longue, draped in a blanket of lilac silk. His grey eyes, once luminous with creativity, now glistened with sorrow. "There is no greater wound than that inflicted by a trusted heart," he whispered, voice barely audible. Dr. Dalrymple instructed us to proceed gently. Moreau's convalescence was fragile, and recommended we defer the formal inquest until his strength returned. Nevertheless, justice must not languish, and so Hastings and I set about interrogating the household staff and neighbours, whose testimonies might reveal the extent of Duval's conspiracy. Our first caller was the night watchman, Samuel Kerr, a gaunt man with a tobacco-stained pipe and a face lined by midnight vigils. His testimony added nuance to our understanding. He had heard Moreau practicing late into the previous night, hardly surprising for a composer nearing his magnum opus. But between 4 and 5 o'clock, he caught the faint creak of the study door and hushed voices. One voice high-pitched, pleased, Kerr said, another low, insistent. He could not identify the speakers but recalled the low voice saying, "At dawn, all will be mine." I noted the rhyme of dawn with Duval's own annotation in the ledger. Dawn's light reveals all truths. It appeared Duval had chosen the moment when the house was deserted. Moreau's sister Eloise rehearsing across the square, servants at early chapel, to separate his masterwork from its creator. Madame Raymond spoke next, recounting Duval's bizarre behaviour the day prior. obsession with the score's perfection, sudden fits of rage whenever Moreau offered suggestions. He would lurk behind the curtain as the master played, she told us, trembling. And once I found him at the piano with a pencil poised above the stave, but no music in hand, erasing Moreau's notes as he drew his own. Her words confirmed Hastings's suspicion that Duval had practiced forging Moreau's handwriting before appropriating the famed composer's signature. I resolved to inspect Duval's own manuscripts for comparison. Our search led us to Duval's own lodgings, a modest flat overlooking the square. While Hastings questioned neighbours who had heard violin strains at odd hours, I examined the room's sole desk. Beneath a stack of blank music paper lay 2 volumes, a daily journal bound in faded brown leather, and a portfolio of Duval's own compositions, each annotated with miniature fingerprint smudges at the corners. Comparing them to the stolen sonata's pages, the jagged, inka's edge and inconsistent spacing betrayed Duval's handiwork. His handwriting, once bold with confidence, faltered in the coda he had penned in haste. Melodic lines that stumbled into discord, unworthy of Moreau's genius. Hastings rejoined me, clutching a neighbour's statement. Duval had visited Madame Cavendish's flat the evening before the attack, bearing a leather satchel distinct from his usual portfolio. Why would he involve the Duchess, who had no obvious interest in musical scores apart from her charity concerts? I pondered this as the late afternoon sun slanted across Duval's study, casting long shadows among his violins and music stands. The satchel itself, we later discovered, held inks and pigments for manuscript illumination, evidence that Duval planned not only to steal, but to embellish Moreau's work with decorative flourishes, thereby claiming the guise of both author and artist. Yet, who had supplied these rare materials? The provenance traced back to Caro and Inkley, the same stationers called in during the Opera Glove affair. A curious connection that demanded further exploration. Our inquiries next turned to Eloise Duval, whose grief seemed laced with guilt. She admitted her brother confided in her, revealing he felt Moreau had used him as a mere stepping stone, praising the pupil's technique, but never crediting his guidance. He seethed at Moreau's acclaim, she confessed, tears slipping under her makeup's delicate sheen. My brother believed that by destroying the sonata's end, he would destroy Moreau's legacy, and demand the world see only his own name in the limelight. I pressed her. Did he ever threaten you? She flinched, only with silence. If I spoke, he said, the sonata would vanish forever, and Moreau would die. A chilling echo of the composer's own near-fatal wound flashed in my mind. Duval's threat had been no idle boast. He meant to kill Moreau's music, and perhaps the man himself, until dawn claimed the truth. That night, I returned to Cavendish Square, my path lit by a wan moon. Moreau, now awake, rehearsed the first movement with Dr. Dalrymple at his side. Each note rang clear, an affirmation of life over treachery. I stood in the study, silent witness to the duel of wills, until the last note faded and Moreau closed the piano's lid with a sigh of contentment. I approached him gently. Monsieur Moreau, you have heard your sonata again, without fear. He offered a weary smile. Yes, Monsieur Poirot, and I feel my strength returning. I handed him Duval's confession and the ledger entry. These shall remain as testament to your perseverance and as a warning to those who believe envy may best art. In the days that followed, the formal inquest convened, and Etienne Duval offered no defense beyond remorse. He spoke of his envy, his blindness to brotherly love, and begged forgiveness in words tremulous with humility. Public opinion, moved by Moreau's survival and the restoration of his last sonata, softened to Duval's plight, sparing him from the gallows, but condemning him to exile from musical society. Héloïse, restored in her sisterly role, cared for him in domestic confinement, teaching him that true artistry requires not theft, but devotion. At last, on a crisp morning that heralded winter's approach, Moreau returned to the Cavendish Square drawing room for a private performance of the complete sonata. Hastings and I sat among a small gathering of friends and patrons, including Madame Cavendish, whose charitable foundation now funded scholarships for disadvantaged musicians. Moreau's fingers danced across the keys, weaving each theme into the next with unerring grace. The final coda soared, triumphant and unbroken, a testament to resilience and the enduring power of truth. When the last chord faded, the assembled rose in hushed reverence, tears glinting beneath lamplight. Héloïse, seated beside her brother, held his hand as he took his bow, his frail body trembling with exhilaration. Duval sat apart, eyes closed, consumed by the knowledge that he had almost silenced this music forever, and that grace had spared him its final note. As we departed into Regent Street's winter dawn, Hastings turned to me. "Poirot, the world may deem this merely an affair of ink and envy, but we have witnessed art's fragility and its triumph." I nodded, my moustaches twitching in contentment. "Indeed, Hastings, and now that this final sonata has been rescued from the silence, we may be certain that no matter how great the ambition, no masterpiece can die while the heart of truth still beats." And so concluded the fourth chapter in the tragedy of the last sonata, a tale of envy's dagger and justice's refrain, resonant upon the strings of conscience and the keys of the soul. Chapter 5. Crescendo of Conscience. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Cavendish Square drawing room as Alphonse Moreau rose from his chaise longue, new-found strength coursing through limbs once weakened by betrayal and poison. The restored manuscript lay open on his piano, flawless to the last note, its ivory and ebony keys awaiting the composer's touch. I entered quietly, Captain Hastings at my side, and found Moreau inhaling deeply, eyes closed, as if preparing to summon every idle memory of melody, every breath of inspiration. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," he greeted, voice steadier than I had ever heard. "This sonata, now complete, shall stand as testament to the endurance of art." He gestured toward the manuscript. "I wish to perform it for a gathering of friends and patrons this evening, an intimate recital before the larger concert next month. Will you honor me with your presence?" Hastings offered a broad smile. "It would be our privilege, Monsieur Moreau." I inclined my head. I would not miss it for the world. Throughout the day, the house hummed with expeditions of preparation. Héloïse Duval oversaw the placement of fresh roses upon the piano's lid, a gesture of apology and hope earned through loyalty rather than blood. Madame Raymond arranged satin cushions upon every chair in the drawing room, and in the corner, Dr. Dalrymple mounted his medical satchel nearby, as though guardianship of life extended to the exalted realm of music itself. By afternoon, even Madame Cavendish had arrived, her composure tempered by the relief of Moreau's recovery. When twilight fell, the candle-lit room filled with guests, loyal friends of the composer, representatives of the Lyceum who had witnessed the sonata's near demise, and a handful of critics whose early reviews had hinted at Moreau's greatness, but would now bear the weight of his ultimate triumph. At the center, Moreau sat at the piano, his fingers poised above the keys. I watched him, for I had studied his manner intensely since our first meeting in this very room, how his head tilted in thought, the gentle furrow of his brow, the way his lips parted in silent invocation of theme and counterpoint. He began with the opening bars, legato phrases that rose and fell like sighs of morning breeze, each note perfectly shaped. The room hushed. Tapestry and furniture became silent witnesses. Eloise watched her brother's recovery in awe, tears glinting at the corners of her eyes. Hastings leaned forward, his hand poised over his program, as though expecting no less than a miracle. As the sonata progressed into its scherzo, Moreau's technique revealed both precision and passion. The manuscript's more ornate passages, once threatened by Duval's theft, now unfolded in full glory. The obligato lines weaving among themselves as if dancing upon threads of light. The audience sat rapt, scarcely daring to breathe. Dr. Dalrymple's eyes brimmed with professional pride, for he had preserved this life. Madame Cavendish rested her hand upon her heart, recalling how close she had come to losing this composer's final symphony of existence. Midway through the third movement, a delicate adagio. The candles flickered as though stirred by unseen currents, as if the room itself held its breath. Here, the theme of reconciliation emerged, a motif that Moreau reserved for last, a melody born of pain but elevated by forgiveness. I noted how his touch softened, how each chord seemed to release the burden of betrayal, transmuting it into something profoundly beautiful. This fugue of light and shadow danced upon the polished wood, speaking of lives restored and hearts unshackled from envy's cruel grasp. When Moreau reached the final coda, Duval's missing cadenza now restored in every measure. His fingers flew with a fervour that threatened exhaustion. The music swelled to fortissimo, yet beneath its brilliance lay a whispered echo of mortality, a reminder that genius itself can nearly die when ambition eclipses humanity. At the last note, he released the keys with trembling hands and closed the piano lid, as though sealing his sonata's fate forever. A moment's silence reigned, sacred as the hush before dawn. Then the room erupted in applause, soft at first, then building like a tide until every guest rose to their feet. Eloise rushed forward to embrace her brother, while Hastings and I exchanged satisfied glances. Even Madame Cavendish rose, her silver fan fluttering tears upon her cheeks. As the audience fell into a respectful hush, Moreau rose, bowing deeply. He wore an expression of serene triumph, a man who had overcome great adversity to deliver his final gift. He raised a hand in acknowledgement of each cluster of guests, critics, patrons, friends, and survivors of his near death, and finally to the empty piano, as though offering gratitude to the instrument that had borne his soul. When the applause subsided, Madame Cavendish stepped forward to present Moreau with a slip of paper. It was a letter from the Lyceum's board, formally offering him a commissioned position as composer in residence, an honour he had long deserved but never attained. Moreau's eyes shone with a mix of surprise and joy. "I accept," he said simply, voice strong. "Music shall remain my purpose." The evening concluded with a modest reception in the garden, where lanterns swung from tree branches and laughter mingled with the scent of rose and damp earth. Guests sipped wine and toasted to the composer's health, each glass raised in memory of the darkness that had threatened to engulf his creativity. Hastings turned to me as we stood beneath a blossoming magnolia. "Poirot, I have witnessed many remarkable things, but tonight feels like the world's conscience has sung its sweetest refrain." I tapped my cane thoughtfully. Indeed, Hastings, we have seen how beauty, though fragile, can endure the cruelest tests when courage and integrity stand guard. I gazed at Moreau, speaking softly to Eloise beneath the boughs. And in the forgiveness we extend to those who have wronged us, we compose the finest coda of all. When the lanterns were extinguished and the guests had departed into the night, Moreau and Eloise invited Hastings and me to stay for a final moment. We gathered beneath the portico, where the composer offered each of us a small violin-shaped token, musical notes engraved upon silver. To remember this night, he said, and the power of harmony restored. Eloise pressed Hastings' token into his hand, whispering her gratitude. She offered me mine with a warm smile. As we stepped back into the fog-laden street, the tokens secure in our pockets, Hastings sighed with contentment. "Will you accept a final brandy at the Café de la Clé?" he asked. I nodded, slipping my token beneath my coat. One last toast to truth's enduring melody. Thus closed the fifth and final chapter in the tragedy of the last sonata, a tale of shadows redeemed by song, of betrayal undone by forgiveness, and of art's indomitable power to illuminate even the darkest corners of the human heart. And as the fog swirled beneath the gas lamps, the music lingered on, a testament to the symphony of conscience that no dagger can silence. Chapter 6. The final cadence. Dawn broke over Cavendish Square in pale, hesitant hues, as though the city itself lingered in the aftermath of last night's triumph. The mist that sheltered London's cobblestones had lifted, revealing crisp autumn leaves strewn like musical notes upon the pavement. Within number 18, Alphonse Moreau sat at his grand piano, its polished surface reflecting the morning light. He played the opening bars of his final sonata once more, each note imbued with fresh purpose. In his petite audience, Eloise Duval by his side, Dr. Dalrymple offering quiet encouragement, and Madame Raymond furtively dabbing tears. The composer found both strength and solace. No longer did the keyboard tremble under his hand. Instead, his fingers danced with the assurance of one who had confronted mortality itself and emerged unbowed. The sonata's central theme swelled in rich harmonics, then softened into a tender adagio. As Moreau concluded the final movement, its triumphant coda now intact, he lifted his gaze to find me, Hercule Poirot, standing in the doorway with Captain Hastings. Eloise rose to her feet and with radiant pride offered Moreau her hand. He touched it gently, grateful for her steadfast devotion and for the brother she had once defended, now humbled by conscience. I stepped forward, cane in hand, heart full of admiration. "Monsieur Moreau," I said quietly, "your music has survived both poison and theft. In that survival, it becomes more than notes upon a page. It becomes testament to the human spirit." My words carried across the silent room like a final chord. Moreau inclined his head, emotion glinting in his eyes. Hastings joined me, placing a reassuring hand upon my shoulder. "A masterful performance in more ways than one, Poirot. You saved this man's life and his legacy." Moreau nodded. "And he shall ensure that Duval's misdeeds are remembered only as a cautionary tale," I added. "Justice will follow its course, tempered by mercy." Eloise's face softened at this, for she believed, as did I, that her brother's exile from the musical world, rather than harsher punishment, would serve both poem and punishment. That afternoon, the formal inquest convened at the Old Bailey, a solemn procession of witnesses and evidence. I presented Etienne Duval's confession, the ledger margins recording his treachery, the blood-stained silver pin, and the final fragments of manuscript recovered from the Duval Gardens and the hidden loft. Each piece wove together into an unassailable narrative. A man's envy transformed into theft, attempted murder, and violated trust. Hastings testified to the porter's and watchman's accounts, while Madame Héloise Duval recounted her own heartbreak and courage in exposing her brother. The court, moved by the composer's near loss and the extraordinary measures taken to restore his work, sentenced Duval to banishment from musical society and a period of supervised confinement with his sister, an outcome blending justice with compassion. When the gavel fell and Duval was led away, Héloise wept not in shame but in relief. She turned to cradle her brother's hand as he passed, whispering assurances that, once penance was paid, he might find redemption not in stolen applause, but in teaching the craft he had once tried to corrupt. I watched, heart warmed by the possibility of forgiveness, restoring even a broken musician to harmony. News of the case rippled through London's salons and concert halls. Critics who had once dismissed Moreau's earlier works now hailed his final sonata as his magnum opus, a composition born of both beauty and near destruction. A benefit concert was organized at the Royal Lyceum, with proceeds to fund a scholarship in Moreau's name for disadvantaged composers. Headlines read, "From Poison to Praise, Last Sonata Rescued," and Hercule Poirot's Little Grey Cells Save Composer's Life. Yet under the acclaim lay a subtler recognition that art, when threatened by malice, can emerge more luminous for the trials endured. That evening, Hastings and I attended the benefit concert, seated in a box with Héloise Duval and Madame Cavendish, herself an esteemed patron of the arts. The hall shimmered with candlelight, and the audience included both high society and the musical community, students, connoisseurs, and casual admirers drawn by the sonata's legend. Moreau, resplendent in evening dress, returned to the piano to deliver a heartfelt address before playing the sonata in full. His voice shook as he thanked friends and strangers alike for preserving his work, but his hands never faltered at the keys. As the final chords reverberated through the auditorium, the applause rose not merely for the music, but for the resilience of creativity itself. Héloise wept tears of joy, and Hastings, ever the gentleman, dabbed his eyes discreetly. I observed quietly, moustaches twitching with satisfaction, content that truth and beauty had triumphed over envy and violence. After the concert, a reception was held beneath the ornate portico, a gathering of admirers offering bouquets and accolades. I found Héloise among them, radiant despite her fatigue. She intercepted me with a small envelope. "Monsieur Poirot, this is for you," she said, pressing it into my hand. "A note of thanks from Moreau, and a ticket to any future concert. My brother need not fear your summons." I bowed, recognizing the generous spirit behind the gift. Inside the envelope lay a single card bearing a quill motif, and the words, "To the detective who restored my song, your place with us is assured." I smiled, touched by the gesture. Hastings joined me, raising his glass in salute. "Here's to Moreau, and to you, mon ami. You unravelled every knot and found the truth behind each clef." I tipped my glass, and here's to friendship of the steadfast kind. For while mysteries may abound, it is the harmony of trust that sustains us all. As the reception waned and the guests departed into London's clear night, I lingered in the square, surveying the assembled throngs. The lamps cast long reflections upon the damp pavement, linking the music hall's triumph to the city's quiet streets. Parsons and shopkeepers nodded in acknowledgement, their hearts lightened by the sonata's survival. The world beyond Cavendish Square had turned without knowledge of the drama within, yet its gentle pulse had been restored by the courage of a few. Returning to Baker Street, I found Mrs. Hudson awaiting with hot chocolate and fresh scones, comfort food for weary souls. Hastings sank into an armchair by the fire, still humming the sonata's central theme, while I removed the small violin token Moreau had given me. I polished it thoughtfully as the brandy warmth crept through me. The token's engraving, a treble clef entwined with laurel leaves, spoke of triumph earned through trial. "Another case concluded, Hastings," I said, settling into my own chair. "One might think that after facing poison and attempted murder, we deserve a quiet interlude." Hastings smirked. "Knowing you, mon ami, I expect the next mystery to arrive at our door any moment." I tapped my nose. "True, the world's concert is never finished. Fresh movements await us all." As the fire crackled and the night deepened, I reflected on the journey we had undertaken. The theft of a masterpiece, the betrayal of a trusted pupil, the near-fatal assault upon its creator, and the tireless pursuit of truth that restored both life and art. The tragedy of the last sonata had reached its final cadence, a harmony of justice and mercy, a composition of human frailty and redemption. And though the final bow had been taken, the resounding echoes of that sonata would linger in hearts and halls alike, a testament to the enduring power of beauty unmarred by darkness. Thus closed the 6 movements of this tale, 6 chapters of intrigue, betrayal, and ultimate triumph, each bound by the notes of conscience that, when struck together, formed a chord stronger than any malice. And as I lay aside the violin token and allowed my eyelids to grow heavy, I knew that wherever melody and mystery entwined, Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings would be ready to ensure that the final chord remained true. Chapter 7. Resonance of Reckoning. The fine mist that clung to London's cobblestones had lifted by the 7th morning after the unravelling of Etienne Duval's deceit, revealing a crisp autumn sun that gilded Cavendish Square with promise. At number 18, Alphonse Moreau sat at the edge of his chaise longue, polishing the ivory keys of his piano before seating himself with deliberate calm. The room had become a sanctuary of renewed purpose, where every note played signified not only beauty, but defiance against the darkness that had threatened to smother his final sonata. Élise Duval hovered nearby, no longer the sister of a would-be thief, but the champion of her brother's rehabilitation, inserting fresh sheet music into the rack and smoothing linens on the sofa for the day's visitors. I arrived with Captain Hastings at mid-morning, greeted by a hush broken only by the distant hum of carriages and the faint rustle of wind through the beech trees planted along the terrace. Moreau rose to welcome us, his eyes bright and his posture steadier than at any point since the attack. Dr. Dalrymple stood at his side, stethoscope slung across his broad chest, satisfaction emanating in measured nods. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," Moreau greeted us, voice carrying the timbre of every successful recital. "Your return gladdens my heart. I trust you are well?" He offered a gentle bow of his head. Hastings returned the gesture with affectionate warmth, and I inclined my moustached countenance in approval. "We are well, monsieur," I replied, "but the season presses on, and I understand you have invited a select group of colleagues for a private demonstration of your restored manuscript. Mayhap we might witness it anew." Moreau's smile reflected gratitude and unspoken hope. "Indeed, we shall gather in the library at 2:00. Eloise has arranged light refreshments, and I wish to present not only the sonata, but also a token of my thanks to those whose aid proved indispensable. As we toured the drawing room, I noted subtle changes. The upright piano's lid bore a small inlaid plaque reading, "Rescue of a Masterwork, 1910," framed by laurel leaves in gleaming brass. Beneath it lay a neat pile of ivory and ebony tokens, tiny replicas of the violin-shaped gifts bestowed at the initial recital, each engraved with a different musical symbol, signifying courage, loyalty, and conscience. Madame Raymond, the housekeeper, hovered discreetly to place fresh roses in vases around the room, their petals a soft contrast to the rich mahogany panelling. In the corner, Jenkins arranged the medical case Dr. Dalrymple kept at the ready, though the doctor assured him no further use would be required. At precisely 2:00, the assembled guests arrived, a handful of fellow composers, 2 music critics whose reviews had once dismissed Moreau's work as promising yet unfinished, Colonel Graves in his civil attire, and Madame Cavendish, whose foundation had underwritten the benefit concert. Each bore expressions of eager anticipation, mingled with the memory of peril overcome. Moreau greeted them individually, shaking hands with a warmth that belied his earlier frailty. Once everyone was seated, amid the velvet-draped chairs, Moreau rose and cleared his throat. "Mes amis, mes chers collègues, you have witnessed the worst that envy and malice can inflict upon art. Tonight, I present not only my final sonata, but also my gratitude for your unwavering support. Let us begin." He settled at the piano, hands resting lightly upon the keys. The opening movement resonated through the high-ceilinged room like a sunrise, its themes of awakening and renewal flowing in broad, sweeping arcs. The critics leaned forward, pens poised. The composers closed their eyes to drink in every harmonic turn. Hastings, ever the connoisseur, pressed his fingers together as if lightly touching the music itself. Madame Cavendish, seated beside him, dabbed at her eye with a lace handkerchief, while Eloise sat with head bowed, tears of relief gleaming in her lashes. During the scherzo's rhythmic interplay, I observed Colonel Graves in silent reverence. His own trials as suspect in the opera glove affair had been met with fortitude, and now he listened as someone redeemed by friendship and tenacity reclaimed his voice. As the music reached its adagio, Moreau's performance trembled with vulnerability, a deliberate modulation that underscored the sonata's narrative of betrayal and reconciliation. At times, his hands shook, but each tremble found its counterpoint in the key's steady resonance, as though the piano itself cradled him in its harmony. When the final coda began, no listener dared exhale until the very last note, a chord that brightened from minor sorrow into a major promise. Moreau released the keys and rose, his silhouette framed against the sunrise golden panes. A heartbeat of silence followed, then applause so thunderous it shook the portraits along the walls. The critics leapt to their feet, quills forgotten, voices raised in acclamation. The composers embraced, sharing handshakes and congratulations. Even Madame Cavendish offered a rare spontaneous smile, her silver-beaded bag swinging from her wrist as she rose to salute the composer's triumph. As the guests mingled, I guided Hastings toward a small table where the tokens lay. "Observe, mon ami," I whispered, "how this sonata has become more than music. It is a testament to resilience, each note a stitch in the fabric of the composer's life." Hastings grinned, pressing a token between his fingers. "A fine souvenir, Poirot, and to think it began with a poisoned glove and a stolen manuscript." I nodded, moustaches quivering in amusement. "Indeed, yet let us not forget the lesson beneath the melody. that beauty, once threatened, demands guardians of courage and conscience. At the moment, Élise Duval approached, offering me the token carved with a treble clef. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, voice soft, "for your wisdom and steadiness, I offer this small recognition." I bowed, touched by her sincerity. "Madame, the greatest honor is knowing the sonata sings. Once more, I need no further accolade." Hastings intercepted us with a glass of champagne. To the composer, to his sister's devotion, and to justice meted by little grey cells. He raised his glass, and we drank deeply, the wine's bubbles mirroring the bright promise in the room. As the reception wound down, the guests departed into the crisp afternoon, bidding Moreau and Eloise farewell until the grand public performance next month. Jenkins closed the door behind them, and the drawing room returned to its serene hush. I turned to Moreau, who had returned to the piano, pressing his fingertips lightly upon the keys in a silent farewell. "Monsieur Moreau," I said, stepping beside him, "your sonata's last cadence now rings true. May its echoes inspire generations to come." He smiled, a gentle curve of gratitude. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. Without your insight, my final work would have perished, and my life's purpose with it. I am forever in your debt." He offered his hand. I took it, feeling the lingering pulse of creative vitality. "Then let us part as friends," I replied, "for tomorrow brings new mysteries, and I must return to Baker Street." Élise joined us, offering a fond embrace to her brother and a gentle curtsy to me. "Should you ever require assistance in the realm of music," she quipped, "you know where to find us." I inclined my head with a smile. "I shall remember, madame. And should the world's next enigma involve sharper notes than these, Hercule Poirot will be ready." Thus concluded the 7th chapter in the saga of the last sonata, a movement of renewal and celebration, where betrayal's harsh, dissonant chords gave way to the triumphant harmony of compassion and justice. And as the sun dipped toward the horizon, London's streets glowed in retrospective warmth, echoing the day's final applause for beauty safeguarded at great cost. Chapter 8. Echoes beyond the finale morning broke over Cavendish Square with a crystalline clarity that seemed to celebrate the renewed harmony within number 18. A gentle breeze stirred the beech trees lining the terrace, scattering auburn leaves like scattered musical notes across the wet pavement. Inside the drawing room, Alphonse Moreau sat at his piano, eyes closed in quiet reflection. The final sonata's coda still lingered in the air from last night's private recital, and each passing moment seemed to underscore the magnitude of what had been restored. Not merely a composition, but the composer's very spirit. Élise Duval entered bearing a cup of chamomile tea, its steam curling like wisps of melody. She placed the cup upon a small silver tray and looked upon her brother with unguarded admiration. "Monsieur Moreau," she said softly, "you played as though every note carried a piece of your soul. I wish the world could hear it all now." He opened his eyes and smiled, a luminous expression that spoke of both gratitude and resolve. "The world will hear it, Eloise," he replied. "Tonight, at the public premiere, every hall in London will bear witness to the sonata's true voice." Her eyes brightened, but her hands trembled slightly at the prospect of her brother once more stepping into the public eye. By midday, Hastings and I arrived with a small entourage. Dr. Dalrymple, who had insisted on supervising Moreau's health until the premiere, Madame Cavendish, whose patronage had funded the benefit concert, and Colonel Graves, whose own experience as a suspect in a very different mystery had taught him the value of vigilance. As we greeted Moreau and Eloise, Madame Raymond moved quietly among us, adjusting cushions and offering peppermint lozenges. A sense of solemn excitement hung in the air, like the anticipatory hush before an overture. Moreau led us into the conservatory, a glass-roofed annex where potted palms and ferns formed a verdant sanctuary and outlined the evening schedule. "The sonata's performance will begin promptly at 7, he said. "I shall open with a short address. Then, as the notes unfold, I ask only that the audience listen without interruption. Let the music speak for itself." Dr. Dalrymple stepped forward, tapping a watch. "Your stamina is admirable, monsieur, but remember to pace yourself." Moreau nodded, smoothing down his waistcoat. "I am well prepared." Hastings clapped him on the shoulder. "Break a leg, maestro." I offered a rare wink. "And may your little grey cells guide your fingers as well as they guide mine." Afternoon melted into early evening as dressers adjusted stage lighting in the drawing room and tableau preparations unfolded. Chairs were arranged in semicircles around the piano. Candles were lit in brass candelabra, and soft violet drapes framed the wide windows. Eloise oversaw the final rehearsal of the opening address, refining her brother's script to ensure gratitude to every ally, from the stationers who had provided fresh ink to the night watchman, whose vigilance had marked Duval's midnight trespass. Hastings intercepted me near the door. "How many guests are expected?" he asked. I consulted a list. 50, including critics and fellow composers. The Lyceum's board will attend via proxy. They fear public scandal, but support Moreau wholeheartedly. Hastings nodded. A balanced audience then, enthusiastic yet discerning. At 6:30, the first arrivals rapped upon the door. I greeted them with a courteous bow and offered earthenware mugs of spiced cider to ward off the evening chill. Among the early guests was Clarice Fontaine, a promising young prodigy who had studied under Moreau's tutelage before the sonata's theft threatened her mentor's reputation. She approached him with tears in her eyes. "Monsieur Moreau," she whispered, "you have saved my belief in music." Moreau pressed her hand. "And you, mademoiselle, will carry this legacy forward." Her sob of gratitude echoed through the glassed conservatory like a tiny triumph. As 7 o'clock approached, Eloise took her place beside the piano, offering Moreau a nod of encouragement. The final guests, Lady Brinner's agent, Mr. Lockwood, Mr. Jenkins the stagehand, and a pair of foreign correspondents, found their seats, and Madame Cavendish raised a decorative bell. At her signal, silence fell. Moreau rose, smoothing the lapels of his jacket, and stepped to the centre of the room. He held the ledger that had recorded the sonata's trials and triumphs, placing it upon a gilt music stand. For a heartbeat, he surveyed the audience, which now included faces both familiar and new, and allowed the hush to deepen. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, voice resonant with emotion. "Tonight we witnessed not merely a performance, but a resurrection. Envy sought to drown this sonata in darkness, and malice aimed to cut short its final notes. Yet through courage, loyalty, and the singular efforts of many friends, this music stands unbroken. May it speak to the perseverance of the human heart." He gestured to me with a respectful bow. "I offer special thanks to Monsieur Hercule Poirot, whose little grey cells restored both my life and my masterpiece." The audience applauded warmly, and I inclined my head, acknowledging their gratitude with the modest pride of a detective who understands that some victories are measured not by solved puzzles alone, but by lives saved. He seated himself at the piano, and the opening chords flowed like liquid gold. The inaugural movement soared with majesty, each phrase shaped by Moreau's intimate knowledge of triumph over despair. The drawing room seemed to expand, its glass ceiling now an orchestra of stars, each witnessing the music's rebirth. In the second movement, the scherzo danced with wit and elegance, revealing Moreau's playful spirit, even amid sorrow. Colonel Graves tapped his foot in appreciation, recalling how music had buoyed his own courage in a case of deadly intrigue at the opera house. Clarice Fontaine closed her eyes, absorbing each harmonic shift, as though committing the sonata to memory in her heart. When the adagio unfolded, a hush as profound as the grave befell the audience. Héloïse Duval's slender figure trembled with empathy, while Madame Cavendish dabbed at her eyes, her support born of both charity and genuine love for the art. Hastings leaned close to me, whispering, "He plays as though his very soul pours through his fingertips." I nodded, my moustaches quivering in concurrence. And indeed it does. The final coda rose with unparalleled fervour, a synthesis of hope and remembrance. Moreau's hands danced with confident abandon, the sonata's restored cadenza now luminous in every measure. When the last note rang, it lingered in the air like a benediction. Héloïse sprang to her feet and threw her arms around her brother, her tears falling freely. The audience exploded into applause, cries of "Bravo! Bravo!" cascading like a storm. The distasteful echoes of betrayal were cleansed by this triumphant ovation, replaced by a collective acknowledgement that beauty, once threatened, can emerge more radiant than before. As the applause subsided, Hastings rose and motioned for me to join him in calling forward the key figures. Madame Cavendish tapped her bell, summoning reflections from the critics who now penned fervent praise, bemoaning the world's near loss of a genius. Mr. Lockwood pressed Héloïse's hand in a gesture of respect, while Jenkins, cheeks flushed, offered Moreau a bouquet of white lilies. Clarice Fontaine presented a small engraved music box, a token that played the sonata's opening motif when wound, a gift from the composer's pupils, symbolizing the perpetuation of his musical lineage. Finally, Etienne Duval entered, escorted by Dr. Dalrymple, his countenance humbler than any I had seen. He approached Alphonse Moreau with measured steps, and Moreau extended his hand. The audience fell silent, unsure whether to witness reconciliation or condemnation. But instead of reproach, Moreau embraced his former mentor, saying in a voice wreathed with compassion, "Brother, let this music unite us rather than divide." Héloïse sobbed with relief, and Duval's eyes brimmed with contrition. The moment embodied the sonata's ultimate theme, that of forgiveness triumphant over envy. I watched the tableau with profound satisfaction, for in that embrace lay the fullest resolution of betrayal and redemption, far more resonant than any punitive measure alone could achieve. Hastings patted my arm. A remarkable coda to the entire affair, Poirot. Not only was the sonata restored, but the composer's humanity was affirmed. I tapped my nose thoughtfully. Indeed, Hastings, in music as in life, true harmony arises when discord yields to compassion. The reception that followed sparkled with warmth and laughter. Foreign correspondents scribbled notes of wonder, contriving headlines such as "Sonata Reclaimed from the Shadow of Death" and "From Poison to Praise, a Composer's Resurrection." Meanwhile, Mrs. Hudson's upturned nose would have approved of the evening's array of refreshments: eclairs shaped like musical notes, petit fours dusted in gold, and champagne served in fluted glasses etched with treble cleves. As the last guest drifted into the night, Moreau invited Hastings and me for a final cup of tea in the conservatory. We sat amid the potted palms, now glowing faintly in the glow of electric lamps newly installed by Madame Cavendish's bequest. Héloise passed around delicate china cups filled with jasmine tea, their fragrance a gentle counterpoint to the evening's exhilaration. Moreau raised his cup. "To my saviours and my friends," he said, voice earnest. "May the world remember not only the notes of my sonata, but the unwavering hearts that preserved it." We echoed his toast, and as I sipped the warm infusion, I reflected on the journey we had undertaken, from open betrayal to clandestine theft, from near-fatal violence to public redemption. The tragedy of the last sonata had been transmuted into a triumphant celebration of art and humanity. When I finally took my leave, the midnight hour had approached, and Regent Street lay hushed beneath a star-filled sky. Hastings and I lingered for a moment upon the steps of number 18, gazing back at the softly glowing windows. The music room stood silent now, its piano resting in dignified repose, the last sonata's pages safe and sound within Moreau's steady hand. Hastings sighed contentedly. "Well, Poirot, another case reaches its grand finale." I smiled, tapping my cane. "Yes, Hastings, we have journeyed through the darkest chord of envy and emerged into harmony renewed. Yet the overture of life continues, and I suspect fresh mysteries await our little grey cells." He saluted with a grin. "Then let us return to Baker Street, and to that brandy pear tart waiting for us at the cafe." Arm in arm, we strode into the London night, our footsteps echoing like the fading notes of a final, triumphant sonata. Chapter 9. The Coda of Consequences. The morning after the benefit concert dawned crisp and clear, as though London itself had exhaled in the glow of Alphonse Moreau's triumphant redemption. Regent Street's early traffic hummed beneath a pale blue sky, and the passing hansoms bore passengers who spoke excitedly, some quoting lines from last night's recital, others marvelling at the unbroken persistence of genius. At 221B Baker Street, I found Captain Hastings poring over the morning papers, his spectacles perched at the end of his nose. "Look here, Poirot," he called, nudging a broadsheet toward me. The headline read, "Moreau's masterwork resounds. Critics hail the miracle sonata." Beneath it, several columns offered effusive praise. Phrases like "a testament to artistic perseverance" and "a triumph over the dark forces of envy." One critic even predicted that the sonata would stand among the greatest compositions of the 20th century. Hastings beamed as he read. "Nothing quite like seeing one's friend lauded by the press, eh?" I smiled, sipping my morning tea. "It is gratifying, Hastings. Yet we must not forget the quieter repercussions. The scholarship fund established by Madame Cavendish, the apprenticeship endowed in Moreau's name, and the subtle shift in Duval's fortunes." Hastings raised an eyebrow. "Duval? He's still under house arrest with his sister, I believe." I nodded. "Indeed, though Héloise intends to restore his dignity through teaching rather than performance. His probationary exile ends this month, after which he must demonstrate genuine contrition before the Royal Academy." At the moment, Mrs. Hudson entered with a telegram bearing the Lyceum's crest. I broke the seal and read it aloud. "Monsieur Poirot, the management of the Royal Lyceum requests your presence at a private council tomorrow morning. Confidential business of artistic import. Major Sinclair." I folded the telegram thoughtfully. "It appears my services are required once more, this time in matters of policy rather than poison." Hastings chuckled. "You can't escape the theatre, can you?" We spent the remainder of the morning arranging arrangements, Hastings drafting replies of thanks on behalf of Moreau, I penning a brief note of acceptance to Major Sinclair. By afternoon, I boarded a hansom bound for the Lyceum, Hastings taking leave to deliver proofs of the benefit concert program to the press. The theatre's facade greeted me in the waning sun, grand and unblemished, its arches now proudly proclaiming the Lyceum's season of renewal. Inside, I was conducted by a curtained corridor to Major Sinclair's office. The governor rose to greet me, his uniform crisp, his manner grave yet cordial. "Monsieur Poirot," he began, "thank you for coming at short notice. I regret that London's greatest puzzle, Etienne Duval's misdeeds and Moreau's recovery, leaves a final complication." He motioned me to a seat. "The board is divided over how best to welcome Monsieur Moreau into his new role as composer in residence. Some members fear that the spectacle of his near demise might overshadow future seasons. Others argue that it would inspire young composers to persevere. We require your counsel on whether to organize a public lecture, a formal gala, or to let the music speak for itself." I considered. "The balance lies in proportionality, Major. A single gala tribute may risk turning the tragedy into continuous spectacle. Conversely, a modest public lecture, Moreau speaking on creativity through adversity, would allow him to frame his own narrative without constant fanfare." Sinclair nodded. "A lecture, then, with admission proceeds to the scholarship fund." I inclined my head. "That would honour both his artistry and his humanity, without imposing undue burden on his recovering health." Sinclair exhaled. "Excellent. I shall propose it at the next board meeting." With my duties at the Lyceum concluded, I made my way to Cavendish Square, where I found Dr. Dalrymple overseeing Moreau's afternoon practice. The composer paused at my entrance, bowing with elegance. "Monsieur Poirot, to what do I owe the pleasure?" I explained Sinclair's proposal and offered the invitation personally. Moreau's face lit with delight. "A lecture! How fitting to transform my ordeal into teaching. I shall begin drafting my remarks at once." Eloise, who had been adjusting the metronome's setting, beamed. "He speaks of pain as a teacher rather than a curse. The lecture shall be most illuminating." As I prepared to depart, Moreau handed me a small envelope sealed in crimson wax. "A token," he said, "a dedication to my Saviour." Inside lay a single page of elaborated melody, a theme I had admired at our first meeting, now refined into a lush, new orchestration. I studied the notes, the graceful curves of Moreau's handwriting soaring across the stave. "Your genius knows no bounds," I said sincerely. "I shall treasure this." He nodded, eyes bright. "And I shall treasure your friendship, Monsieur Poirot." Returning to Baker Street as twilight settled, I reflected on the tangled journey from theft and attempted murder to public vindication and personal growth. Hastings was already at the window, late post in hand. "Any more telegrams?" I asked. He waved the letters in the air. "Just invitations to the lecture and society gossip. It seems the world cannot resist a good encore." I placed the manuscript page upon the mantel, its notes casting dancing shadows in the lamp's glow. "An encore is due then," I mused, "and I shall attend to hear the composer whose life was nearly silenced now reclaim his voice." That evening, I found Hastings at home, teacups in hand, discussing the day's developments. He leaned toward me conspiratorially. "You know, Poirot, I heard from a colleague. Moreau's lecture sold out in minutes. He even donated tickets to young music students." He shook his head in admiration. "That is turning adversity into opportunity." I nodded, tapping my chin. A true artist transforms hardship into harmony, and in so doing, he ensures that the music and his story resonates long after the final bow. As I sipped my tea, I glanced at the violin-shaped token engraved with the treble clef once more. Its metallic surface caught the lamplight and seemed to hum with memory. I smiled, my little grey cells already anticipating the next mystery, the next puzzle to unravel. But for tonight, I allowed myself the quiet pleasure of closure, a composer's legacy restored, a brother's redemption begun, and a sonata whose final notes would linger in the hearts of all who heard them. With that comforting thought, I prepared to retire, confident that wherever beauty faced the threat of destruction, truth and compassion would prevail, an enduring coda to any tragedy. Chapter 10. The Resonant Aftermath. London woke gently under a misted dawn, as if reluctant to break from the triumph that had reverberated through its concert halls only hours before. Regent Street's shopkeepers swept pavement damp with dew. Hansom drivers prepared for a new day's fares, and the air carried hints of fallen leaves and tobacco smoke. Yet at number 18 Cavendish Square, the atmosphere remained sacred and hushed, for here the echoes of a composer's final sonata still hovered like invisible ghosts, notes of triumph that would not fade. Inside the drawing room, Alphonse Moreau sat before the grand piano, hands folded in his lap, eyes bright with quiet satisfaction. Beneath the lid lay his restored manuscript, every bar of the last sonata now secure in his beloved handwriting. At his side, Eloise Duval arranged roses before placing a steaming teacup upon the music rack, the steam curling in gentle spirals like a cadenza. Hastings and I entered softly, welcomed by Madame Raymond's discreet smile and the comforting scent of lavender sachets tucked into every drawer. Dr. Dalrymple lingered by the window, ensuring Moreau's continued recovery with professional vigilance. Moreau rose to greet us, his movement steadier than ever before. "Messieurs, Captain Hastings, Monsieur Poirot," he began, voice warm and resonant. "I thank you once more for the restoration of my work and my life. Today, I have only to enjoy the simple pleasure of music, free from peril." He gestured to the piano, where the keys gleamed like pearls. "Shall we play through the final sonata one last time? Not as a performance, but as a remembrance." Hastings offered a cheerful nod. "An excellent idea. Nothing soothes the soul like the unfettered flow of a masterpiece." I inclined my head in agreement. "Indeed, and this will serve as a private coda before the world greets your public lecture next week." As Moreau seated himself and closed his eyes, atmosphere shifted from reverence to communion. His fingers rose above the keys, pausing in respectful silence, then descended with deliberate grace. The first movement's elegant themes unfolded, rising and falling like gentle tides. In this intimate circle, each note found resonance not only in the instrument, but in each listener's heart. The air vibrated with memories. The theft, the assault, the near tragic demise and final redemption. Yet here, in this morning light, sorrow seemed distant, replaced by a sense of unbroken continuity. When the scherzo's playful rhythms brought a smile to Eloise's lips, Dr. Dalrymple tapped his foot in time, and Hastings hummed the counter-melody under his breath. Even Madame Raymond paused her dusting to lean against the doorframe, enraptured by the unspoiled beauty. Then came the adagio, lessons of patience and compassion woven into a tapestry of sound. Moreau's touch grew tender at this moment, as though he caressed each harmony in gratitude for second chances. I closed my eyes, recalling the first time I heard the sonata in the shadow of near destruction. Now, its peace restored, it felt like a benediction. At the final coda, Moreau's arpeggios soared without hesitation, culminating in a triumphant chord that seemed to shake the panes. He released the final note and opened his eyes to a silence thick with awe. A breath passed among us, then Hastings rose to applaud, joined quickly by the doctor, Eloise, and finally by me. Moreau inclined his head with modest pride. "Merci, mes amis," he said softly. "Let us treasure this moment." Later that morning, after a simple brunch of fresh bread and soft cheese, the doorbell rang in measured intervals as guests arrived for the day's final audience. Senator Decker, a patron of music in the House of Commons, Mrs. Kingsley, head mistress of the Royal Academy's School of Music, and Herr Fischer, a visiting conductor from Leipzig. Each greeted Moreau with admiration. The senator praised the sonata's emotional depth. The headmistress marveled at its pedagogical value for students. The conductor reflected on its orchestral potential. Moreau, gracious and composed, accepted every compliment, his sister by his side to ensure he neither overexerted himself nor fell prey to exhaustion. By midday, all visitors had departed with tokens of gratitude, a promise of future collaborations, invitations to foreign premieres, and bouquets of white lilies and purple irises. Eloise managed the farewell with gentle hospitality, while Dr. Dalrymple took charge of Moreau's medication schedule and rest periods. I lingered, examining the manuscript's final measures one more time. The dedication in Duval's confession had been scratched out. In its place, Moreau had penned a new epigraph. "To those who choose compassion over ambition, our greatest melodies are yet to be written." I touched the words reverently. Here lay not only the resolution of a mystery, but the embodiment of its moral. As the day waned, I prepared to depart for the lecture hall at the Royal Lyceum, where Moreau would deliver his public address on the theme of adversity and creativity. Hastings joined me for the carriage ride, carrying the violin-shaped token gifted by Moreau at the benefit concert. "Do you think the lecture will fill the hall?" Hastings asked, settling the token in his coat pocket. I adjusted my cravat. "Undoubtedly. The public craves both the music and the composer's testimony. His story transcends a mere performance. It resonates as a testament to resilience." Hastings smiled. "I must admit, I'm as eager to hear his words as to hear the sonata again." The lecture hall at the Lyceum stood magnificent beneath its vaulted ceiling and ornate chandeliers. The audience filled every seat. Patrons, critics, music students in their uniforms, and even a contingent of MPs who had heard the senator's praise. A hush ensued as Moreau ascended the lectern, his silhouette lit by a solitary spotlight. He bowed, eyes reflecting the hall's grandeur, combined with the composer's humility. He began, voice steady yet imbued with emotion, recounting the theft of his final sonata, Duval's envy, the violent attack that nearly ended his life, and the unwavering support that restored both his health and his work. Then he transitioned to the heart of his talk, how adversity shapes art, forging melodies that bear the weight of human struggle. He quoted lines from his own sonata, how the adagio's tender theme emerged from grief, and the final coda's triumph sprang from forgiveness. He concluded with an exhortation to aspiring musicians to embrace setbacks as compositional tools, weaving them into their own creative narratives. When his lecture ended, the crowd rose in a sustained standing ovation. Hastings and I joined in, clapping until our palms ached. Moreau's words had added new depth to his sonata, understanding that its notes were not merely abstract beauty, but the embodiment of lived experience. As guests filtered into the foyer for post-lecture refreshments, Madame Cavendish presented Moreau with a ceremonial key to the Lyceum, an honour reserved for those who had made indelible contributions. The composer's acceptance speech, delivered with wry humour and profound warmth, elicited further applause and tears. Eloise watched from the wings, pride and relief mingling in her expression. When the hall emptied, Hastings and I slipped backstage to congratulate Moreau. He greeted us with a broad smile and offered each a glass of champagne he had requested for the occasion. To courage, he toasted, to the little grey cells who reveal the truth, and to music, our eternal companion. We drank, letting the golden bubbles carry the day's final resonance. As midnight approached, the hansom carried me back to Baker Street under star-strewn skies, the city's lamplights shimmering like distant notes in a nocturne. Hastings ushered me inside, closing the door against the night's chill. Mrs. Hudson stood by with brandy and peppermint, ever the guardian of our comfort. I retreated to my armchair by the fire, token in hand, reflecting on the sequence of events. The theft of masterpieces, the attempted murder, the restoration of art, and the healing power of compassion. Though mysteries may swirl around us like accidentals in a score, the ultimate harmony arises when justice and mercy share the stage. As the embers glowed and the brandy warmed my chest, I allowed my little grey cells a moment of repose, confident that tomorrow would bring new enigmas, new overtures to decipher. Yet for tonight, I savoured the coda of consequences, the reverberations of truth restored, art preserved, and humanity's finest notes played once more. Chapter 11. Echoes in Eternity. The dawn after Alphonse Moreau's public lecture broke with a serenity that seemed to bless every street and square in London. Regent Street's lamplighters stoked gentle flames as shopkeepers unfurled awnings against a sky washed in rose and silver, and the air carried the faintest strain of last night's final coda, an echo of hope that lingered from the concert hall to the quiet lanes of Cavendish Square. Inside number 18, Moreau stood at his piano one last time, hands folded upon the gleaming lid, as Eloise Duval arranged fresh lilies in the vases, and Dr. Dalrymple made his final rounds. No more tests remained, no further pills or salves. The composer's strength had returned in full measure, and his masterpiece had claimed its rightful place in the world. I entered quietly alongside Captain Hastings, each of us bearing the little violin-shaped tokens bestowed the night before. Hastings held his between thumb and forefinger, smiling at the engraving of the treble clef entwined with laurel leaves, while I tucked mine into my waistcoat pocket as a silent reminder of the journey we had shared. Moreau turned toward us, eyes bright, and offered a gracious nod. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," he said, voice rich with gratitude. "It is fitting that we gather here, in the quiet heart of the home that witnessed both my darkest hour and my greatest triumph. Today, I have but one wish, to depart for Vienna, where my sonata will be performed at the Musikverein spring season. Will you accompany me as my guests of honour?" Hastings bowed with theatrical flourish. "I would not miss it for the world, mon ami." I inclined my head, knowing that to witness the sonata's international premiere, its first performance beyond London, would bring this chapter to a fitting close. Eloise's eyes glistened with excitement and pride. "We shall leave in 2 days," she said gently. "I have arrangements with the Academy to continue my brother's scholarship work in his absence, and Duval, my brother, will join us once he completes his period of reflection." Moreau turned to Dr. Dalrymple. "Doctor, I am well enough to travel." The physician's spectacles gleamed as he smiled. You are stronger than I could have hoped, monsieur. I grant you permission to embark upon this journey, and I look forward to news of your success." Moreau's shoulders squared in relief. "Then Vienna beckons," he declared. Over the next 48 hours, Cavendish Square bustled with preparations. Advocates of the Lyceum's public lecture circulated invitations to European dignitaries. The courier from the Royal Academy delivered final certificates to scholarship recipients, and the Carrow and Inkley stationers brought specially bound copies of the sonata to accompany Moreau's departure. Hastings oversaw the packing of configurations for travel, carefully wrapping the fragile manuscript leaves in acid-free vellum and sealing them within a lacquered case. Eloise prepared her brother's wardrobe with identical care, ensuring that each uniform, each casual dressing gown, reflected the dignity restored to his life. On the morning of departure, a private carriage awaited at the square. Moreau, Eloise, Captain Hastings and I took seats amid plush cushions, our luggage stowed nearby. Jenkins, the stagehand whose steady hand had saved Moreau on the night of the attack, stood at attention to wish us farewell, his own ticket to Vienna granted in gratitude for his role. Dr. Dalrymple clasped Moreau's arm in farewell, cautioning once more against overexertion. Madame Raymond, cheeks pink with pride, presented Eloise with a parting gift, a journal engraved with the Lyceum's crest for her to record both her own progress and her brother's triumphs abroad. Each embrace carried unspoken recognition of how far we had come. As the carriage rolled away, I glanced back at the townhouse, where tragedy had nearly extinguished a great life. The windows gleamed with promise, as though they, too, were glad to bid us Godspeed. Hastings leaned forward, peering through the window glass. "Do you think the Viennese audience will receive the sonata as enthusiastically as ours?" he asked. I tapped my cane against the carriage floor. "Without question, Hastings, for a work born of darkness and redeemed by perseverance will speak to the hearts of all who understand the candour of adversity." Our journey to Vienna passed in a pleasant blur of rolling countryside and polite conversation. Eloise and Hastings exchanged recollections of London's storms and triumphs, while Moreau reviewed his lecture notes and rehearsed his address in German. I watched them with quiet contentment, my little grey cells satisfying themselves that the threads of intrigue had been woven into tapestries of loyalty and courage. When we finally arrived at the Musikverein, its golden portico glimmered beneath a clear spring sky, and the city streets thronged with music lovers unaware of the saga that had preceded this moment. On the night of the premiere, Moreau stood at the edge of the stage, the manuscript case at his feet, and surveyed the hushed hall. Hastings and I sat in the front row, Eloise beside us, tears shining with anticipation. The conductor bowed, and the orchestra raised their instruments. When Moreau settled at the piano, hush deepened to sacred stillness. His fingers danced the opening theme with a fluidity that spoke of suffering transfigured, each note a triumph of spirit. In that moment, Vienna became a chorus of thanks, reminding us that art's greatest power lies not only in beauty, but in its capacity to heal. The final chord elicited an ovation that shook the gilded walls, the audience rising in a baying roar of approval. Moreau bowed repeatedly, tears of joy glinting beneath the stage lights. I rose as well, offering my applause to the composer whose life had been intertwined with tragedy, whose work had emerged resplendent. Hastings pounded the bench with an enthusiasm unusual even for him, while Eloise wept softly with relief. The sonata's coda, once stolen and nearly strangled, now soared beyond London's confines, its echo destined to resound for generations to come. Weeks later, we returned to London on soft spring breezes, the city's trees a delicate green. Etienne Duval had completed his period of reflection and was found teaching with quiet humility at his sister's request. The scholarship in Moreau's name awarded its first recipients, promising a new lineage of composers shaped by adversity's lessons. The Lyceum adopted the security measures I had recommended: dual key access to valuable scores, nightly logs for unique manuscripts, and quarterly rehearsals for staff to detect tampering. Caro and Inkley, chastened by their role in previous mysteries, instituted stricter protocols for stationery and sealing wax, ensuring that no further ink-bound intrigue could take root. Back at Baker Street, Hastings and I reflected upon the sonata's journey from theft and violence to international acclaim. I stood at the mantelpiece, polishing the violin token Moreau had given me, and gazed at the scattered pages of other unsolved mysteries awaiting my attention. Hastings joined me with tea in hand. "Well, Poirot, what now? Another case?" he asked with characteristic grin. I tapped my nose in thoughtful anticipation. "Always, Hastings. The world's ledger of enigmas remains open, and fresh pages call for our little grey cells. But for now, let us savour the echoes of this final sonata, both its music and its moral." He raised his cup. "To perseverance, compassion, and the enduring power of truth." I raised mine. "To friendship, Hastings, and to the promise that even the darkest chords can yield the most radiant harmonies." And so, as spring unfurled its tendrils across the city, we settled into the comfort of home, knowing that wherever melody and mystery entwine, Hercule Poirot and his steadfast companion will be ready to ensure the final note remains true. Chapter 12. The Last Reverberation. The morning sunlight slanted through the gauzy curtains of 221B Baker Street, painting the sitting room in warm, honeyed tones that seemed to celebrate the closure of a long and intricate symphony of events. I sat in my usual armchair, cane resting against the side table, as Captain Hastings entered through the doorway, spectacles perched at the tip of his nose and a well-worn leather satchel in hand. "My dear Poirot," he began with a boyish grin, "the latest edition of the Daily Chronicle has published a glowing retrospective on Moreau's Viennese triumph and the enduring lessons of his final sonata. They headline it, 'From Parisian Poison to Philharmonic Glory.' Would you care to hear?" He produced the paper, and I smiled at the memory of our journey, from the discovery of the poisoned glove, through the restoration of the stolen manuscript, to the composer's ultimate vindication upon 2 continents. "I should like that very much," I replied, settling back as Hastings read aloud passages lauding Moreau's resilience, Éloise Duval's steadfast support, and the little grey cells that had rescued not only a life but a masterpiece. Beneath the praise, however, I noted a subtle shift. The article spoke of how adversity can transform artistry, how values of honesty and compassion underpin every true creation. It was a fitting coda to a tale that had begun in malice, yet resolved in mercy. After Hastings had concluded, he folded the newspaper and set it aside. "And now that our friend the composer has found peace among Vienna's gilded halls, and his sister continues to educate musicians with a renewed dedication, what remains for us? More mysteries, no doubt." He winked. I tapped my moustaches in contemplation. "Indeed, Hastings, the world's ledger of enigmas will always require our attention. Yet this particular case closes with a harmony so complete, so rich in moral and musical resolution, that I shall treasure its echo for many years." I paused, gazing at the mantelpiece, where a small brass plaque now read, "In memory of Alphonse Moreau's last sonata, 1910, rescued by courage and conscience. Mrs. Hudson entered quietly, bearing a tray of tea and fresh scones. She placed them upon the table between us, offering both a victor's welcome and the comfort of domestic routine. "Morning, gentlemen," she said, adjusting the sugar bowl. "I hear the newspapers had rather a lot to say about your recent exploits." She winked at Hastings, who laughed. "Morning, Mrs. Hudson," I replied warmly. "Indeed, the city's press cannot resist a good story of redemption." The scones were warm and buttery, the tea fragrant with Earl Grey bergamot. We sipped slowly, savouring both the flavours and the lingering satisfaction that comes from having seen justice done. Once breakfast concluded, I strolled to the window and looked out upon Baker Street's bustle. Costermongers setting up stalls, hansoms rattling past, and clerks hurrying toward the law courts. Somewhere among the crowd, Etienne Duval laboured anew, teaching modestly rather than scheming in solitude. And in a distant gallery, Moreau's final sonata glimmered in prints and scores, its notes poised to inspire generations of composers. The world felt both familiar and transformed, as if our recent odyssey had imparted a subtle shift in its timbre. Hastings leaned against the window frame. "Poirot, in all your cases, you've shown that truth eventually prevails, even when concealed by envy and malice. But few have so vividly illustrated how compassion can redeem even the guilty." He paused. "Do you ever regret showing mercy to Etienne Duval?" I turned to him, expression thoughtful. "Regret? No, Hastings. Justice tempered by mercy is the noblest resolution. Etienne's punishment, to live under the shadow of his own conscience while he seeks redemption, seems more fitting than any harsher sentence. His life's work now lies in teaching, in passing on the very values he once sought to undermine. That transformation, to my mind, is the greatest of all possible finales." He nodded, eyes bright with agreement. A great finale indeed. For a moment we stood in companionable silence, each lost in his own reflections. Then Hastings straightened, rubbing his hands together. "Well, what shall we do now? A Sunday stroll in Regent's Park? Or perhaps a visit to the Lyceum to see how they guard their sheet music these days?" I smiled. "A walk would be most enjoyable, Hastings. And thereafter, we can call on Major Sinclair. He may have further opportunities for our talents." I tapped my cane in gentle anticipation. "But first, I believe we should pay a quiet visit to 18 Cavendish Square, to see Eloise and Monsieur Moreau in their peaceful domain one last time." Hastings grinned. "Excellent idea. Let us set forth." We donned our coats and hats, bade Mrs. Hudson farewell, and descended the stairs into London's awakening streets. The air held a promise of spring, though cherry blossoms still bloomed only in sheltered spots. Our footsteps rang upon the pavement, a duet of purpose, one set determined by a detective's precision, the other by a companion's steady loyalty. Cavendish Square welcomed us with an air of renewal. At number 18, we found Eloise in the conservatory, tending to her father's potted orchids, each bloom a tribute to resilience. She greeted us with radiant warmth, her violet dress matching the petals that bowed beneath her tender care. Moreau sat nearby, reading a score in its original Viennese edition, his slight figure content in the quiet routine he had long missed. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," Eloise said, curtsying. "Your visit gladdens us." Moreau set aside his music and rose, offering each of us a handshake that spoke of deep friendship. "Please join us for tea in the drawing room," he invited. "I've prepared a small recital of my earlier works, to remind us that every composer's journey contains both shadows and light. We sat once more amid the familiar surroundings, the grand piano, the laurel plaque, the violin tokens resting upon a side table, and Moreau began to play. His hands threaded through melodic phrases less familiar, but imbued with the same integrity and passion that had defined his last sonata. I closed my eyes, allowing the music to weave through memory and hope, each note a reminder that life's richest harmonies emerge when discord yields to understanding. When the recital ended, Hastings rose to applaud, followed by Eloise, Dr. Dalrymple, and finally me. Moreau bowed, expression luminous. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Your presence elevates these melodies beyond mere performance." I inclined my head. "It is you who elevates us, monsieur. You have shown that even when a masterpiece teeters on the edge of oblivion, the concert of conscience and courage can restore it, stronger than before." Héloise pressed her brother's hand, and we owe that miracle to Hercule Poirot's insight and to Captain Hastings's unwavering support. Hastings laughed. "All in a day's work, mademoiselle." Yet his eyes shone with the same loyal pride that had carried us through many a perilous case. As we prepared to depart, Moreau gifted each of us a final token, a page of the sonata illuminated with calligraphic flourishes framed beneath glass, "so that you may carry this music with you wherever you go," he said. I accepted mine gratefully, placing it in my coat pocket alongside the violin token and the brass laurel plaque. Walking back toward Baker Street, the afternoon sun sat low in the sky, casting long, gentle shadows. Hastings and I paused at the corner of Wigmore Street to watch children playing beneath a flowering magnolia, their laughter rising like airy arpeggios. He looked to me with a contented sigh. "Poirot, do you ever tire of these adventures?" I tapped my moustaches in reflection. "Never, Hastings. For each mystery cares not only for itself, but for the truths and transformations it reveals. And as long as there are stories to be told, of art threatened and then redeemed, I shall be here with little grey cells at the ready." He laughed, clapping me on the shoulder. "Then let us step into the dusk, ready for whatever comes next." And so, beneath the glow of lamp and leaf, we strode into London's evening, the echoes of the last sonata carried upon the breeze, a final reverberation that bound together past trials and future possibilities in a melody that would never end.